Hey friends, welcome to another episode of the 10 Laws Podcast with East Forest. I'm Mr. Forrest. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode this week. I keep cranking them out. Here we are past 200, and I'm going to keep going. I'm a little low on guests, but that's because I've been really busy as I start to get into touring and stuff, but that doesn't mean it has a way of providing for itself somehow. So there are some actually really interesting people in the books. We just have to get connected to record, and I have lots of fun things I want to share with you. This week, I have a conversation with a repeat guest, an old friend, Charles Eisenstein. Charles is someone that I've known for, in 2008, I met him down in southern Utah. He's kind of the reason, actually, that I have him to blame for now being connected and spending a lot of my time, splitting my time down in southern Utah, because I went to this conference down there because I had read his first book, really second book, but it was one of his early books, The Ascent of Humanity. And that was in 2008, and it was a really powerful experience for me. And I saw that he was doing this, this little conference down there, and I wanted to meet him. And that's really what pushed me to leave New York City at the time and hop on a plane and count my shekels so that I could go do it. And it was amazing, and really, truly life-changing at this point, because I just came back from there. I'm still going down there, and Charles is someone that I've tracked and followed over the years and supported, and I really enjoy talking to him, and I appreciate his point of view. So I just want to give you a little context about this conversation. We initially had decided to talk less for a podcast, more because I was thinking of sampling him again for a song. So you're like, well, maybe we'll talk in the style of a podcast, so to speak, and I'll mine that and see, what I can maybe pull from that and make some new music. So those of you who are aficionados of the East Forest catalog, which I'm sure is a very small percentage, you might know there's a song on the Love Bomb album. I hope I'm not getting that wrong, but it's called Paradox, and it features Charles. And I really love what he says on that. It's actually something that I recorded at that 2008 retreat, like a little talk he gave in this small geodesic dome. There were probably 8 of us or 10 of us. It is beautiful sunny afternoon, and I was never crazy about what I did with the music. Like, I always thought it was sort of an idea I came up with at the time, and I never thought what are other ideas I could come up with? I think it's good. I wanted to try something different with Charles, and over the years that's always been there for me. So anyway, I'm gonna try again, and I'm sure it'll be great. But I was going to hold on to this podcast until that song, was out and tie it all together. But the short of the long of that is it might be a while, just because I'm sort of folding this into a larger album that I'm trying to record, or I am recording, I should say, a larger album that is becoming as we speak. But these things take time. And I also thought that some of the things that we talked about, while large portions of it are universal and about very large themes, which is what's so great about Charles. So that's really timeless and evergreen. And some of it, at the time that we talked, this was back probably at the peak of Omicron, so a little while back. And I don't know, I just didn't want to move too forward in time before the meaning of that had a different meaning for you. So I thought hey, let's just get it out now. So that's sort of the context of why we were talking and when we were talking and where it might be going. So thanks again to Charles for coming on. He's always very honest and vulnerable, and just really committed to seeking out his truth and the truth and just embodying truth. So even way back in 2008 when I met him, he was one of the first people, particularly authors, that I'd met who they walked their talk. They were, the things he wrote about, he was really trying to figure it out in his own life. And oftentimes sometimes I'd meet people and that wasn't the case. They'd write things that were really inspiring, but their life, it really was a complete disconnect in that regard. And that's not a problem, but I just found it really beautiful that it was all sort of one thing. And for myself, I feel that with my own work. Like I don't feel a big chasm between what I do publicly and privately, or I should say with my work itself and how I present it publicly. I don't want that to feel like a presentation. I want it to be an honest exploration of like, I'm trying to figure out how to live a life authentically in a modern world that's collapsing, transforming, changing fundamentally, going through wars now, always going through wars, but right now it feels like a very, very turbulent, difficult time. And as I spoke to last week, my heart goes out to the situation in Ukraine, and I know it's deeply frustrating for all of us. There's so many things going on, and this is one that's just so, we live in a time where we can see and read and hear so much about it, and I think that's a very powerful thing, but it's also very challenging for our nervous systems to just feel so powerless in the face of so much knowledge and revelation right in front of us, right laid bare, and it is, poof. So I think whatever time period Charles and I were talking in, you're going to find themes in there that really speak to all time. So I know you're going to enjoy this very much. Just want to let you know, I will be in San Diego on April 24th, and that's right after Denver on April 20th, and Dublin on April 9th. That's coming right up. There's just low ticket alert on that show. April 6th in London is sold out, but little heads up, this is super secret, but maybe on November 15th, we'll be back in London. There's actually many more shows and events and things about to be announced, including some retreats. So all y'all out there have been asking, will there be more retreats and when? Now, the short answer is yes. As of now, we finally got some in the books, and they're about to be announced. Those do tend to sell pretty quickly. So if you're interested in that or anything else, you want to be the first in the know, go over to eastforest.org and sign up for the newsletter or the mailing list. Social media is another place to catch that, but I know sometimes things get missed. But we're East Forest, at East Forest at Instagram, and East Forest Music on the other platforms. And love to see you out there on the road. Thank you for the support and at the retreats. And of course, thank you to everyone on our council, the patreon.com/eastforest. Our Patreon is a way to support this podcast, support the project. We're actually doing one of our monthly Zoom councils tonight when I'm recording this. So it already happened when you're hearing this. But we do that monthly. That's one of the tiers of support. They're really beautiful, like the way people show up. We usually do a musical live meditation, and then we also just sort of gather and do some scouting out there in the world, witnessing one another. It's been really amazing. I'm really proud of really what everyone else is doing in that group, and I'm just kind of holding that space. But I also share lots of demos, and one of the demos I just shared is for the Dissolved and Dissolving tracks that now are coming out, I think tomorrow, if you are listening to this in a timely fashion. They should be out on Wednesday, the 23rd of March. And on Tuesday, the 29th of March, I have another track coming out. But the Dissolved and Dissolving that are coming out this week, I'll give you a snippet of at the end of the podcast, if you hang in there, is tracks I did with superposition. And one is like with beats and vocals, and one is the ambient version. And they're sort of playing with these ideas of, when you come into revelation, there's this identification with the revelation itself. But ultimately, you go through that, you dissolve into no identification. And we're kind of playing with those ideas with this track. And I just want to thank Justin and Matt, Justin of the Glitch Mob, and Matt of he does some amazing stuff with spatial audio and computer wizardry, and a great bass player. It was fun. It was a fun collaboration. I think you're going to enjoy that. That's out everywhere you listen to music, or wherever you listen to music. And then next week on the 29th, is Piano Day, which is a holiday that was founded by Nils Fromm, and I'm releasing the first track off a new album called Still Possible. Still Possible is kind of like it sounds. It's still the Possible album. Well, no, it's B-sides and tracks that were orphans from that project. A lot of fun stuff in there that just didn't really fit into that concise album. And the first one's called Lone Wolf. It's this beautiful little piano piece, one of my favorites. Very close to being on the record, but it was like that or Mend. And Mend made it, and Lone Wolf is now having its day in the sun on March 29th. And just back on the Patreon, I just want to say thank you to Sam O and Alfonso O, who just signed up recently, and to everyone else who is over there. Thank you so much. Patreon.com/East Forest. Okay, let's dive into this amazing conversation with our old friend, Charles Eisenstein. We'll keep it cash. We'll keep this as real and grounded as we can, so that it's like we're staying out of our performance mind.
That's right. Here, if anyone's listening to this, they've dropped in on a casual conversation.
As hyper boring as it can be, that is our goal, to keep it as
well. Because I just asked Trevor here about what touring is like in COVID, and you were talking about how it's how something had to get canceled and stuff, and I just had something like that as well. I was speaking on New Year's Eve, and then last minute, the venue was, and by the way, I'm shivering because I did a cold plunge and didn't have enough time to warm up.
Yeah, you're quite cold. I was trying to tell you to take some time, but you're like, let's do it. And I'm like, all right, maybe the cold shuts down some part of the brain that edits.
Yeah. Actually, I was like, can we take a little bit more time? And Trevor was like, no, man, you said 11. Now he's trying to make himself look good.
Yeah, there you go. It'll make me seem calmer. I'm putting you in the hot seat.
So this venue is like, well, you are requiring, vaccines, and you're going to mask, and you're going to have COVID tests, right? Or something along those lines. And the organizer was like, no, we weren't going to do that. So they had to scramble. And in fact, the venue had to change twice, and it ended up in somebody's home. Now, it was a commodious house. Like, they had it all set up. Like, it had like this big room, with like even a balcony, and they could fit maybe 70 or 80 people, which was maybe half of the ones that would have come, which was even that, like, it wasn't huge, because it's like we can't really like publicize things anymore.
What do you mean? Like, you thought there'd be backlash about the mechanism of the event itself, the fact that is it in a home, is it not in a home, is it in public, is it virtual? Yeah,
like the really big venues are kind of, I guess there are places where you can do it, but if you're expecting not to have to do any of the vaccine card and the masks and stuff like that, it's got to be a little bit on the down low.
It's underground. It's resistance.
Yeah.
It's resistance.
Yeah, it's like turning into these speakeasies,
Yeah.
And I don't know, like, part of it isn't just necessity. Part of it is like, I somehow don't want to be as public. And like, there's this logic of scale where I used to, even though like in my books, I reject this logic.
Yeah, this is something of yours that you've been espousing that I re-espouse for over a decade about, like, petting a cat and the value of my heart of taking care of a sick grandmother as opposed to Elon Musk taking us to the Mars.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that logic, as a performer or as a writer, as a speaker, like, we're kind of all in the same boat of, well, I want to reach more people.
Yeah.
So if I have and of course the money accompanies that way of thinking, where would you rather perform in, a stadium to 50,000 people, Trevor, or at a little indoor venue with 50 people? Like, that way of thinking says, well, of course, I'd like to speak to the bigger audience. I'd like to perform for the bigger audience. I'd like to have more subscribers on Substack. And there might be a financial element there, but it's not just that. It's also this logic of scale. Recently, so I've been critiquing this logic on philosophical grounds for a while. But But now somehow it's been internalized where I'm like, good, this event is smaller, so it's going to become a stronger resonance chamber, because the people who came to that event after 2 venue changes were the people who really wanted to be there.
Yeah.
And for me as a speaker, the quality of the information that I have available to me depends on the intensity of the listening. It's not,
Yes. Yes.
yeah, it's not coming from me, but it's coming through me. I'm like a tuning, a broadcast station or something like that. And this is like, I don't know, like maybe you can speak to this too, like the how the audience influences the music.
100% is the role of the witness. And I've been thinking actually a lot about this lately. And lately, when I have been performing, I say to the audience, like right at the start, I say, all I'm asking you to do here is just to listen and to breathe. But what I'm really asking for is the gift of your attention, because
Mm-hmm.
it is a direct relationship between how much you give that to me and what I can give back to you. It's a flow of energy. One person on their phone lighting up their face in a sea of 100 people not doing that. It's like this weird sickness that sucks energy out. And it's almost saying, by you choosing to give your attention, really just to be here and really just say, I'm going to suck in everything I'm receiving from the sound and the energy of this room. It comes right back to me. And like you're saying, it's a kind of positive Ouroboros, like feeding
Mm-hmm.
itself. And if you zoom out to our whole lives in the world today, it's all about our attention. I think it was Tristan Harris, right? I think, who said like our attention is our currency. And I feel that nails it right on the head, because I think there's something kind of alchemical there. Like you're saying, you feel it. It feeds you, and you become a reflection of each other. And that's all we are, like as performers. You're reflecting back sort of something from everybody in that room. And so it's incredibly powerful when it becomes more focused like that. And,
Mm-hmm.
Grieving alone, for instance, is important, valuable. Grieving and having that being witnessed by another seems to be, it's like having a therapist or a support group, even more powerful. And so it kind of shows us what that role of the witness is. So
You know what
I
else
totally
I've
agree.
I've been doing along these lines is to purposefully not record when I am speaking in person, to a live audience.
Yeah.
It's like, let's not videotape it, let's not record it.
Yeah. This could be the cool thing in the future. It's like, we're not going to meme this. It's not going to be digitized or scaled. Like that's the
Yeah,
anti growth model in a sense.
yeah, and that that doesn't mean that it's going to have less of an impact in the world. It's just that you can't control or predict how the impact is going to land. And this is I've been thinking in a similar way about other projects, like suppose you're going to have a retreat center or a healing center. Well, the first thing most people think about is, okay, well, it needs a website, needs a mailing list. How are we
Mm.
going to publicize it? Well, what if you don't do that? What if you don't even have a website? What if I hold events and I don't announce them, but I only go by word of mouth? In places like, East Germany, or maybe even today in some places, Iran, Saudi Arabia, you have to do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Because you can't have a public face. And in some ways, in the era of COVID, we have to draw on that way of doing things that people in totalitarian states have developed. And maybe it won't go that way. Like maybe in fact, I would say that the whole COVID lockdown mentality is starting to lift and the narrative is wavering. And to some extent, things are going to go back to, quote, normal. But you know what? Like, I don't want to go back to normal.
You never have, though. I mean, you sort of your whole.
Well,
We're all
no,
people who don't. The normal means sort of like a kind of asleepness. There's
yeah.
not a counter narrative against that of like, hey, there's more than meets the eye or face value of how we normally live life.
But suppose I could go, start holding events at like the big retreat centers again
Mm-hmm.
that have the marketing and all that. Like, do I really want to do that? Or suppose that, like, okay, so at the beginning of COVID, we took our child out of school. And it wasn't a normal school. It was like Montessori school. It was a school that we resonated pretty well with, although there were certain compromises. But we didn't want him to be immersed in masks all day, quite simply. And I hope I'm not being too controversial here. I mean,
well, like, I'm sure. Let's get it. I mean, to give some framing to this. I mean, I would like to have you speak to when I first met you in 2008, and still a lot of your work was about sort of transcending us versus them.
Yeah.
And we're in this time right now where that's super polarized in this COVID narrative. And you've been writing a bit lately, sort of like being on a team in a way or a side, but also talking about what it means to not be on that, but sort of inherent in having opinions, or you're kind of forced through this like viral public health thing to kind of you have to make some decisions for yourself, whether you believe in them or not. You have to make certain decisions. And then it starts to just kind of put it into this one or the other. That's a bit of a challenge and a contradiction for the basis of a lot of how you live life. And that's got to be, and I hear that you wrestled with that. Like, how do I speak about this or not? Let alone what choices do you make internally for yourself and your family?
Yeah, I'm probably like a lot of people. This time of COVID brought up a lot in me that was hidden.
Shadows.
And confronted me with a lot of shadow. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
A lot of shadow. And one of them was my inclination toward inclusiveness. My inclination to try to understand what it's like to be somebody else and to hold all opinions. How much of that is coming actually from fear, from aversion to conflict, from not having the courage to stand up for my convictions, from being afraid that I will be ostracized and rejected?
Conversely, how much are the convictions rooted in fear? I mean,
and how
you
much
could view it either way. Yeah,
right. It can go either way. Like, how much do I want to? Is there a part of me that wants to articulate a polarized position so that at least I get the acceptance of the people who agree with that position? To say something really militant, because then the other militants accept me as one of them. I think there's a lot of that going on today when there's such a crisis of belonging and a crisis of identity, and you can be accepted by taking one side or another. But I know that the solution to this, like the resolution, cannot be that one side defeats the other and triumphs over the crumpled ego of their opponent and gets to say, I told you so.
Yeah, it probably can't happen, right? I mean, in some ways, but you're right, acceptance. And it's almost like the fact, like the pandemic itself, where people feel more isolated, it almost feeds this need. It becomes like a snowball where you need more and more feelings of acceptance and belonging. And then it's like there's this tide that then weaves in with like this technological world we're in, where information is all digitized, and then it's sort of, we get into this super deep uh, zone where things are allowed to be said or not allowed to be said. In the midst, how this weaves in, how cancel culture came into being in the last few
Mhm.
years. It's sort of a perfect storm. But, but I'm sure you step back from it all, and in your heart, you feel that we're in just a world of a fundamental transition. The one you've always been speaking of is just, it's almost exactly where you felt it would always go. It's deeper and deeper and deeper into that process. And
Yeah.
yet, we live in this three-dimensional world where we have to make choices about schools and masks and everything. We live in constant contradiction.
Right.
And it feels more comfortable to say, "Oh, fuck it. I'm just going to go with this camp. Or I'm going to do this." This is a very uncomfortable time of
Right.
never being able to know. There's not even any inherent truth anymore. Even if you want to pick quote unquote a side, you can't ever fully rest in that side and really know. You're always basically just taking a stab here and like, well, I think this, I feel this.
Well, it used to be that you could, I mean, it used to be that you could not take a side. You could keep your opinions to yourself and, still live in society. Like nobody cared when you walked into Trader Joe's. Nobody cared what your opinion was about anything, really. I mean, I guess if you were like a committed nudist, then you would not be able to function in society because of your opinion, if you lived your opinion. But generally speaking, like you could be of any religious persuasion, any political persuasion, you could have any strange medical idea. It didn't matter. You could still go to a concert. You could still go to a museum. You could still go to the supermarket. You could do anything. You could go in an airplane, do anything that anybody else could do. Now,
Absent,
however,
absent of, let's say, racism or people who are discriminated against because of maybe the way you look.
right, but your opinion, like it didn't matter.
Your internal opinion, yeah,
Right.
more or less.
But
Yeah,
now,
the
if
stakes
you
are
have a
higher now.
strong conviction about something, like about masks or vaccines, then you cannot not take sides. You cannot just keep that to yourself. Like we had a strong opinion about our child, as I was saying. He's now 8 years old. Like we were like, we don't want him to be among masked children and masked adults, not seeing a full expression on a person's face all day. That was like, and I'm not saying that you're a bad parent if you do that, I mean, everybody is in a different situation. Everybody's in a different nexus of the information ecology, et cetera, et cetera. It's not like you're wrong, I'm right. It's like this is not right for my child according to my beliefs. And I couldn't keep that opinion to myself and still send him to school. Like that was it. So this is a time where, in a way, we're being, I could say, forced to choose sides, but really what I would like to say is we are in a time where we are being asked to choose. And we are therefore being asked to declare to the universe who we are. And to take some risk to do that. And this is why at the very beginning of the pandemic, I called it a coronation, which wasn't just a play on coronavirus, but it was in the sense of a coronation is an initiation into sovereignty. It's to take mastery of unconscious choices and make them conscious and decide who am I going to be in relation to the world, in relation to our time. So that journey is different for everybody. And I think that many of us, maybe even most of us, whatever side of whatever debate we are on, the vaccine debate, the mask debate, and so forth, we're not allowed anymore to just keep our opinions to ourselves. Like we have to live them in a way that we didn't before. And I think that is how we are creating the future, by making a choice where we have some skin in the game of what future we are aligned with. Like, what do we stand for? Is it a metaverse, technologically mediated future where human contact shrinks into a smaller and smaller private realm, in which more and more aspects of life are controlled, where everything is tracked and surveilled and labeled, and like, is that the kind of society that you want to live in, where safety comes before everything else? Like, what do you stand for? Anyway,
That's a
yeah,
that's a gift, right? I
yeah.
mean, that would be the gift of the pandemic, is that it is revealing shadow and forcing us to make choices. And if anything, it's the recognition of the power of our choices, the importance of them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but let's just take it zooming out a little bit. How do you reconcile love amidst resistance? Or, if you feel that inside what you're saying is you're pushing up against something, there's an inherent resistance that you have to choose, in a sense. Uh, that feels like a contradiction in some ways. Like, how do we coexist when it feels, or is that just the playing field? The playing field is moving and changing in such a way that there's more pressure, and that is the gift. It's like, well, we've chosen to be here as souls in a time where it's even tougher, and that's maybe good, because now you really get into the meat of things. It's not so surface. So I'm asking, I don't know, because I think it could be a trap in a way, or a blind spot. It's like, is it that we're just reacting to something and then picking sides, in a sense, or is there a way to still look at it inclusively, or how do those two work together?
Mm-hmm.
You put a human under pressure, and we know, like, through our psychology, there's certain reactions we can kind of predict, and here we are under pressure, and so how do we stay, like, awake and say, like, am I reacting from my highest truth, or is it my own delusion of being reactive to these pressures around me?
I'm trying to connect with the question behind that question.
Thank you.
I've become less and less interested in being the smart guy with the answers.
Well, tell me about your heart, because that's what you've always done. It's sort of like using yourself as the lab. We're all going through the same kind of process, Charles. I mean, what I've always appreciated about knowing you over the years is having you. It's the same kind of witness. You're reflecting a process that I'm going through too, that we're all going through. I think for a lot of us, though, it's easy just to rest in a conviction. And I'll be honest. Like, I was surprised early on at some of your convictions with this, but also there's a part of me that you're speaking truths of myself too. But it's like, I don't know personally. I really don't. As far
Yeah,
as, like, is something safe, is it not? I have kind of like a mixture, this mess of a soup of, like, well, this
yeah,
thing kind of, and this too, and, like, maybe it's more this, and that kind of freaks me out. But fuck, I don't know. And
yeah,
but
yeah.
it's so polarizing to go. You have to like be on blue or red, not politically, but like the pill
Yeah,
in a sense.
yeah, yeah. In the last year or two, during the COVID time, I went through some of the darkest despondency and despair that I've experienced in my entire life, including this uh, corrosive self doubt that once it got in, it left nothing untouched. And I ended up because I was like, okay, here I am, a public intellectual of sorts, writing about a topic that means life and death for people. So, how do I know that what I am saying is not killing thousands of people?
Right,
And
like a
because this is
blind
some of,
spot you have could end up
yeah,
causing choices, and you're like, man, I was
right,
wrong, or I was right,
yeah,
or who knows?
like I've been more or less a dissident from pretty much not every aspect of the COVID narrative, but a lot of it, you know. And so external critics amplified my own internal critic and said, "Hey, Charles, looks like you are playing out some defiant pattern against your father or whatever, that you are perhaps needing psychiatric help for an oppositional defiant disorder that you may have. And because of your blindness and your irrationality, you are getting people to take COVID less seriously and to be resistant to the medicine that is going to save everybody from this pandemic called the vaccine. And you have blood on your hands. Like, how do you know? I would say to myself, how do you know that that's not true? And that doubt, it grew to like become paralyzing and to infect even like direct experiences that I've had. Cause like it amplified into like, Charles, your entire career has been a spanner in the works of the machine of progress. You're um, impeding the development of technology, of progress. You're a glitch in the matrix, um, and here you are irrationally doubting all of these millions of scientists who are selflessly furthering knowledge. You're like this, all of this. Um, but it got to the point where I kind of forgot the direct experiences that I've had in my life that tell me that reality as it has been narrated to me is incomplete and, in fact, very narrow. And I'm talking about um, experiences of healing. I'm talking about psychedelic experiences. I'm talking about experiences of generosity, of spiritual connection. I'm talking about like actually the most important and most real experiences that I've ever had in my life, where I directly experienced something that science says is impossible. So if I am going to drink the Kool-Aid of trust the science, I'm also saying don't trust these direct experiences that I've had. I mean, and not only my personal experiences, but secondhand experiences of people that I love and trust that do not fit into scientific reality. And then also direct experiences of people who I know who have been in those worlds, who have worked for pharmaceutical companies, who have been in science, and who have these stories of corruption, have these stories of fraud. Like, am I supposed to just discard all of that so that I can conform to an ideology and gain acceptance by the enforcers of the intellectual status quo? And like, I kind of started to do that. And I felt like I was going crazy. I felt like I was gaslighting myself, saying, oh, what you are seeing isn't real. So eventually I came down to that foundation of, because this is the benefit of doubt. It brings you to a point of what do I know for sure? Or what do I know from direct experience that, okay, maybe I was crazy, Trevor. Maybe I was deluded. Maybe That experience with a Qigong master in Taiwan, where I actually felt the energy flowing through my body. Well, maybe I was a gullible foreigner, and he had some kind of trick, and like I could, and what about when my girlfriend saw a ghost, and the ghost transported the alarm clock from one room to another, and there's no explanation. Well, maybe she was just trying to, like, I could come up with a cynical explaining away of every shamanic, every mystical, every psychedelic experience that I've ever had, every experience of synchronicity. And I'm not talking about some trivial coincidence. I'm talking about the kind of synchronicity that makes your jaw drop and says, whoa, there is another intelligence operating in this world, a deeper intelligence, that kind of synchronicity. Well, that didn't happen either. I can explain all of these things away. So ultimately, I made the choice to trust my direct experience. And maybe I'm crazy. Like, there will never be proof. And here, you're just listening to some guy claiming to have had these experiences. Maybe, I'm some kind of huckster who's making unsupportable claims. They are actually unsupportable claims. But what I can do is say, have you had experiences like that? And are you sequestering those experiences in some waste can of, well, that was weird, that was anomalous, that was unexplainable, and sequestering them off from real life and accepting as valid knowledge that is, or ideas that are fed to us through an indoctrination machine that contradict your direct experiences. So this is where I came to. This was the gift of the doubt, to come to an actual solid foundation of my beliefs, and then to build block by block from those. So that pretty much now, like, when I say something in public, I'm pretty clear that that's what I actually believe, and that belief has a solid foundation. And sometimes I do speculate on things. But I'm no longer hiding behind, I don't know. Because for a while I was hiding behind, I don't know. I was hiding behind a false uncertainty that would protect me from criticism. And now I'm like, no, actually, there are some things I do know. And I can't prove them, but I know them in my body. And one of those is it is that children are not served by being in masked environments all the time, especially my children. We could argue about the epidemiological statistics. We could get into a conversation about this study that seems to show that masks do slow transmission was poorly designed, and this study seems to show the opposite. And we could talk about all that kind of stuff. But that's actually not, I mean, maybe those things feed into my belief, but that's not how I want to make a decision.
And knowing it's sort of, you're asking everyone to respect our different knowings, like our knowings in our body and our heart, which I can jive with. But then we have to include the knowings that some people have in their world that say, well, gay people need to go to hell, and these people need to be killed, or all of it. The division it creates. I mean, how do you know and still love? How do you know in the situation we find ourselves in and still feel respectful and inclusive? I mean,
yeah, well, a lot of people claim something as a knowing, when it isn't actually a knowing. When it's actually a badge of conformity, it's a signal of virtue. It's a emblem of belonging,
Mm-hmm.
but not based on direct experience and direct truth. So,
Yep.
like someone who says, "Well, I just know that gay people are going to hell." um, is that a knowing or is that an opinion? Where's that coming from? And what kind of experience does that leave out? If you sit with a gay person and you each share your life story, will you still think that? There's an awful lot of dehumanization going on today. Here's another knowing that I'll offer, that any reduction of a human being to less than a human being, which is actually a sacred being, is a lie. I don't care if it's a racist or homophobic or sexist dehumanization, or the dehumanization of somebody as a hysterical anti-vaxxer or anti-masker or something
Or
like,
pro-vaxxer, pro-masker. Yeah.
or a sheeple or a normie, like I see it on both sides of this debate.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not the truth. The truth is that we are all divine souls, that we are all children of God. And anytime that you are in judgment that says, if I were you, in the totality of your circumstances, I would do differently than you're doing. I would know better. I wouldn't do that if I were you. Do you actually know that? To know that, you have to know what it's like to be you. Well, if you dehumanize somebody, you're actually repudiating knowing what it's like to be them. By saying, well, you're just evil, you're just psychopathic, I'm getting this a lot. I'm being called an anti-Semite, for example. But
Wow.
yeah, that's a whole other story. I got publicly denounced, which is weird. You know, I don't know if you can tell from looking at my face, or my last name. I'm actually half Jewish. you know, but there's a whole story about why I was called an anti-Semite. But it's like this way to cast somebody off. It's a way to put them in the category of other, to make them less than oneself, to make them not fully human. And that's just never true. You can't actually understand somebody and stand in their shoes and still think that. So that's the kind of truth I'm talking about. Like, yeah, I cannot say that I have some direct knowing about vaccine ingredients or something like that. But I do have, like, here's another thing. And I think most people know what I'm talking about when do I want to, like, there's I guess, a bullshit detector or an authenticity detector that we all have if we really tune in. And, there are certain public figures, in fact, actually, most politicians and pundits and authorities, when I see them on TV, when I hear them, I'm like, I don't trust them. Like, I don't trust Bill Gates. I don't trust Fauci. I don't trust Trump. I don't trust Biden. And when I do trust somebody, it's not that I necessarily believe all of their opinions, but when they describe their direct experiences, when they tell their story, I believe them. And that's, underneath all of, like, if we're going to talk about, and maybe you don't want to talk about it, but if we're going to talk about vaccines, if I look at data, then there's going to be somebody who says, well, this data is inaccurate. It's been manipulated, et cetera, et cetera. Like, how can I actually judge anything by data when part of the propaganda and counter-propaganda, which is also propaganda, depends on manipulating data? How can you trust data, for example, when the entire scientific apparatus is so heavily influenced by money? Like, what are we going to, this is like the equivalent of, how do I know what I know? Where do you go?
It is a messy time where, I almost laugh because it's like it's set up to tear down all the things we were leaning on to make it easier to know. And now it's like, okay, all that's stripped away.
Where do you go?
The calling of the time is really learning how to tap in. And how do you do that? Or even better, is there a way we could do it now? Is it a process? Is there anything standardized? It's like, where's that base level that we sit from, where we start to get into this space?
Yeah, I think we have to kind of pick up the pieces and start from the ground again. I was going to mention like this Telegram channel that I found called "They Say It's Rare," and it's simply
they say. I love that.
They say it's rare, and it's simply like tweets that they compile and republish of people who have directly experienced adverse events, or maybe their family member or their friend has. And like, they just ring with authenticity. They're, and I can't prove that these are not, created by some Russian bots or something like that. But when I do follow the tweets, they seem like they're normal people, involved in conversations and like, oh yeah, my sister, whatever. And just like the thousands upon thousands upon thousands of these things, that had a huge impact on me. I'm like, okay, I'm not making this up. So because we are in this age so cut off from community and get so much of our information from centralized technology-mediated sources, a lot of our navigational instincts can't operate very well. Because normally, the way that we confirm truth is we turn to the person next to us and ask them, hey, are you seeing what I'm seeing? That looks weird. And I know that I can't fully trust my own eyes. So I turn to people I trust. In a healthy society, that would be the someone with authority, because people earn authority by earning respect, by being trustworthy. Mm-hmm. And so we have this natural instinct to turn to our elders, to turn to our community. And today that instinct gets hijacked, and because we get so much of our information from the media, and authority has been displaced onto politicians and a corrupt system. So the natural instinct is then to say, oh, okay, is this happening? And you turn to these substitutes for community and authority, and they say, no, it's not happening. Here's what's happening. So we've become very susceptible because of our atomization, because of our disconnection. We've become susceptible to what they call mass psychosis, to mob mentality, to manipulation by those who control information. And in order to regain our knowledge sovereignty as a people, we have to reestablish our direct connections that aren't mediated by technology. And then you hear stories, then like then the stories can't be contained as well. Because if your sphere of relationship is just a nuclear family, and everything else outside of that depends on technology and institutions, then you can't know what's going on out there. You can only know what's going on out there when you're connected. And so I think ultimately, we might get like, okay, the pendulum could swing back, and Fauci and Gates and those guys, they might end up disgraced, and we might have a political counterswing and so forth. But unless we also take this opportunity to rebuild our local and community and peer-to-peer, decentralized, direct connections with each other, we will be susceptible to the same thing again and again and again. So ultimately, any revolution that we are in has to go down to that level. And it's not only the systems by which we connect, it's also the mentality and the spirituality of connection, where our aspiration is no longer to be fully self-sufficient, separate selves, sourcing our needs impersonally via money, via markets, via technology, but to be willing to need each other again, to be willing to know ourselves as not separate, to reestablish all of these relationships and connections, to value that more than the independence and integrity of a separate self, which incidentally is part of the mantra of the COVID regime. Keep safe above all else.
But what more than a virus would show us our interconnectedness on a literal level? You'd think like it was the perfect medicine, but it's almost like too fast, too soon, or too strong,
Well,
or it's like everyone freaked out and it was like, we can't take it. We're going
because when you conceive of it in terms of simply a pathogenic virus, then the solution is to control the virus, to separate even more from each other, to like everything that's happened as a response to COVID has been to accelerate a trend of separation that goes back decades, to accelerate the mediation of life by screens, for example, the migration of education online, shopping online, dating online, entertainment online. Like none of this just started with COVID. The obsession with hygiene, the idea that we shouldn't touch each other, that we shouldn't, like, life has become, for decades, has been less and less in person. And the virus gave a pretext or a reason to intensify those trends. So a virus fits in very well with the reigning ideology of control. But there are other ways to look at it that we haven't done. Like you could see a virus as a symptom, or especially the deaths from COVID as a symptom of a general level of ill health. As everyone knows, some 90-something% of COVID deaths were with people who had other serious comorbidities. So we could have said, wow, why are there so many comorbidities? What can we do about that? Are we willing to totally upend the social order in order so that people will, like, are we willing to make the enormous changes to end chronic disease as we were to contain COVID? And no, I mean, chronic disease has been skyrocketing for 2 generations now.
And it's complicated too, because chronic disease doesn't have, you can't point at one virus, for instance,
that's right,
and say like, well, the cause is so complex and truly not fully known. It's from toxicities to lifestyle to food to,
right.
goes on and on and on.
There's not an enemy.
There's not a clear enemy.
Yeah.
It's not a clear, easy fix. It's a very complex medicine, but there has to be room for sort of everything. It's true that the main message going out is sort of oversimplified to the point of defeating its purpose. Just saying like everybody just go vax, go vax, go vax, and you just stepping back and saying something like, well, but clearly we know now that that's not going to stop the spread. So the message itself needs to be changed a bit, and it kind of can't be done. It's like if we make this more complex, people will be confused. They won't be able to handle it. We have to sort of stuff it down their throats in the most simplistic black and white form as possible. Get a vaccine. But on the other end of the polarity of that spectrum, it's true too that it can't just be resistance to the mainstream message, because there's truths in there, and there's truth. It is complex. It is not a simple answer. And I see on the resistance sort of a blindness to accepting anything that's coming, that's like from the mainstream. It's like, well, we have to recognize that there has to be room in some ways for all of it.
Yeah. So I think that as the dominant story breaks down, many people go through a phase of rejecting every single thing that old story said. So it goes way beyond rejecting the vaccine.
It's like rejecting all medical science or something.
Yeah. Or there's a lot of people out there who say, well, viruses don't even exist.
Or all the news, for instance. It's like all the news now is corrupt.
Everything
you read, everything is through the
is
system
fake.
of the internet.
Yeah. Right.
Except for the stuff, my groups.
Right. And I think that's kind of like a natural phase, to move from everything is right to everything is wrong. And at some point, people then move on to construct a new story, maybe using a lot of the rubble from the old story. A lot of that stuff is useful. And
what is your dream of where we can go with the rubble? Tell me a little bit about your knowing, even if it's a quiet, fragile knowing of where
I would
could
say
build.
All of the what I call the technologies of separation, the technologies of control, have a valid place. It's that we have to understand their proper use and their limitations, what they can achieve and what they cannot achieve, and to embed them in an understanding that there is a larger intelligence that operates in this world beyond force-based causality. Because, modern medicine is capable of incredible miracles. You can get, third-degree burns over 90% of your body and still survive. You can have a horrendous traffic accident and be hemorrhaging blood, and they can save you. You can be born 3 months premature and still live. Modern medicine has incredible powers, but the mentality of control then gets applied to everything, and including areas where it is useless or almost useless. One of those is chronic disease. Like, the best you can do is palliate symptoms for most chronic diseases in modern medicine. Whereas, I've seen too many times to count people coming in to Stella or to other alternative practitioners, and their chronic disease of decades is cured by one treatment. I've seen this again and again. A friend of mine, had horrible, debilitating menstrual cramps every month for her entire adult life. She goes to an acupuncturist, and they're gone permanently from her treatments. Well, okay, that's just an anecdote, but my point being, we could talk about anything. We could talk about crime, public safety. Like the paradigm of control says, put CCTV cameras everywhere, lock up the criminals, preempt crime, have a surveillance society, more and more control. Well, we've been on that path for decades, and it hasn't ended crime because the causes of crime are not something you can control. It's not just a bunch of bad guys. The cause of disease is not just a bunch of bad guys. The cause of agricultural losses is not just a bunch of bad guys. And if we kill the weeds and kill the pests and kill the insects, then we'll have perfect agriculture. The cause of terrorism is not a bunch of bad guys. And if we can control the terrorists and build walls and bomb everybody, then we'll have a safe world. Our society is facing problems against which control does not work. And primary among them are things like domestic violence, addiction, and chronic disease, especially autoimmunity. So we are being asked to use technologies of control only in their proper domain and to understand what that domain is and not try to conquer the universe anymore, but rather as a human species to accept our place in the universe and to know our role as being servants of life and beauty rather than the conquerors of nature and the imposers of intelligence onto a world that has none. Our future is participatory. It starts with listening. Yeah.
It starts with listening. Yeah. And tell me about what role listening plays, both to yourself, to others. I mean, what does it mean to learn how to listen?
Listening, when I'm listening to my body, my desires, my heart, what makes me feel alive, when I'm listening to the stories of other people, and I'm using listening here to include observing in all ways, then I know how I can contribute to what wants to be, to what wants to become. If I'm having a conversation with you, Trevor, and if I'm not really paying attention to you, say, and maybe I've done this a little bit in this conversation where I'm kind of like, okay, how can I say the next thing that I want to say? But here's this human being here. And if I tune into you, then I know what to say. Because I'm speaking to a real human being here and not just like some cartoon character in the drama that I'm projecting onto the world. It's about coming into full connection with not just another person, but with humanity in general, with life on Earth. It's accepting myself as part of a larger drama, as a co-creator, as a companion. You know, like this is not a familiar way of thinking in a market economy, where first and foremost, you see other people as competitors, opportunities to maximize your own interest. And how am I going to get the best deal? And am I getting ripped off? Am I getting taken advantage of? We are thrust into a society of competition in school too, competing for grades. And the dehumanization I spoke of before is another way to not really see each other. So, you know, like to take it back to COVID and COVID health policy, the invitation is to really see each other. When we start to really see each other and really listen to each other, what is it like to be you? Then our rigid ideological differences begin to crumble. I'm convinced that if we really listened to the whistleblowers, to the people suffering adverse events, things would change radically. The status quo, and not just with COVID, but with poverty, economic inequality, ecological destruction, all of these things depend on not seeing each other, not hearing each other. And by each other, I mean not just human beings. One of the Kogi said, um, in talking about the coastal, quote, development that is destroying the wetlands and estuaries of Colombia, he said, if you knew she could feel, you would stop. If you knew the land could feel, the water could feel, you would stop. And how do you know that it can feel? How do I know that you can feel? How do I know that you're not just some robot, actor in my narcissistic drama? I have to see you. I have to be willing to know you, to like see you in full as a human being. And the same for nature. The same. This is interbeing. This is the dissolving of our separations by which we reduce the world. That's the revolution that we're in right now. And if it doesn't go to that level, it is not any revolution at all.
It's cutting deep for everybody. I think the revolution right now is inherently real. And the calling is like, how much fat do you want to cut away? Like, will you allow things that don't serve you or that aren't needed to slough off, and we can hold on to them or not? That's really kind of the choice. Um, how deep will you allow it to cut on a personal level? And I don't pretend that that's easy. But the inclusiveness is a kind of allowing the ideas that you're uncomfortable with too, and allowing the things that you're pushing up against. Like, how do you love the things that you choose not to do, or you see maybe you feel as a blind action or a blind choice, um, from whatever your vantage point. But you have to find room for that too.
Yeah.
The corners of truth that exists in all aspects of this, even if something has been reduced down to something black and white, none of it really is. And that's really hard for us right now because it's being truncated down into something black and white. Like,
Right.
take a vaccine, not take a vaccine, wear a mask, not wear a mask. And I feel like in some ways that's what's breaking down. And the easy solution is to fall into, no, it is black and white. But how do you hold something that feels so black and white as multifaceted truths that has to originate from an internal knowing? That's not easy, especially for a society that is largely disconnected from the self, or literally sick, which makes it harder and harder to feel those truths and know those truths and to listen because you're busy with pain of
Mm-hmm.
different sorts. Um, so I mean, I recognize it is that's what makes it so hard these days. And I feel for myself, I feel for people that really there's no way to find your lighthouse other than through yourself, through the internal landscape. We can't just keep reaching out and say it's just then it's this or it's that or I'm going to follow this. I mean, we naturally can keep doing that, but it rings hollow, and it just keeps breeding the same sickness of we're being asked to learn how to go inside in a way that maybe a lot of us don't know.
Yeah. Like I was saying, there is the technologies of control do have a role. And the lens of black and white has a role. The response of a fight has a role. It's kind of expanded to usurp everything else.
Mm.
But there is a moment where, and it's come up in me here, as I've been very averse to it, but there is a moment where I'm like, yeah, I'm going to take a stand. Kind of like I feel forced into it. Like I never wanted to impose my medical beliefs on others. But if I'm being coerced into abiding by their medical beliefs, then I'm going to resist. And a lot of people are being coerced right now. And I felt like, yeah, I can entertain that there's something right and something wrong about all viewpoints, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't want to participate in the gaslighting of people who are resisting for some of the same reasons I am. So that's why I have, in a manner of speaking, taken sides in the, in the current time.
Is the revolution still love for you, though? Because
Yeah, because it doesn't. Because my goal is not to defeat the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
My goal is for things to change, and if those who have been pushing the current public health agenda never admit that they were wrong and are never punished, I'm okay with that, as long as things change. My goal is not to triumph over them. My goal is a society of health sovereignty, moving in a holistic direction. I mean, one thing that's happened in the last couple of years is like decades of progress in holistic and alternative medicine have been just swept aside. And like you could get banned from Facebook and Twitter for even saying, hey, like this herb has antiviral properties and could help against COVID or something like that. Like even vitamin C and vitamin D, like you could get censored for advocating those things. Like even like the least controversial alternative approaches to health were cleansed, were expunged from acceptable discourse.
Yeah, that's a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, yeah, I lost the train of thought here, but.
Well, but I just what I'm trying to say is like, in some ways, this is a symptom, and so like underneath it, I didn't want to get too like. It is at the face of a lot of reality for us, but it's not the thing itself. It's that kind of control and the othering, and amidst this all, we talk about the role of like faith and hope, and I think if you get lost into these symptomatic camps, like what does it mean for you what is faith for you, or what is hope, or how do you cultivate that amidst all this? It is fundamentally, you have to say, yes, we're seeing collapse and transformation. That's still what's happening. It might be not how we want it to happen, or it's extremely messy, or all these things we're getting into. But
so, do you feel hopeful, Trevor? And how do you distinguish hope from wishful thinking?
I was going to ask you that.
But I'm wondering where this question is coming from. Because
I do feel hopeful, but I also it's a contradiction. Like everything to me is the mystery. It's like it's meant to be a both and. Like it's meant to be a not knowing with a little k and a knowing with a big K at the same time. Like I feel like that is the essence of what it means to be alive, especially right now. It's just so rich. It's so thick. So if I'm hopeful, it's just to say that I could step back from it and say, like, it seems so obvious that the metamorphosis is underway. And at the same time, I say, and man, this is a mess. And this is a lot of suffering. And this may go really badly.
Mm-hmm.
And yet it feels somewhat oddly natural at the same time. And that's the kind of spiritual bypassing I try to be careful of, to say like, well, it's all perfect, but a lot needs to change, and action and choices need to be made. But I don't want to get locked up into, oh, I need to fight this, I need to fight this, I need to fight this. But at the same time, I feel in my heart, there's a naturalness, just as everything composts on this earth, as our brother bio, it's composting, which is stinky and gross, but it's happening. I certainly don't have the answer of like why I can see every little microorganism, how all these trillions of bits are going to form this whatever is coming next, but it's this endless blossoming, and it's just really thick right now and really rich.
Well, I would say authentic hope is a premonition of a possibility. It's the recognition of a beautiful future that is reaching into the present. And that's very different from wishful thinking. Because what inspires hope is to actually get a glimpse of what is possible. So even in the darkest times, if you witness an act of generosity, you'll feel hopeful. Why? Because that is a tendril from a future of generosity. If you witness healing, you will be hopeful. If you witness a miracle, large or small, if you experience a synchronicity, you will feel hopeful. It's amazing how quickly hope is aroused, even if you've been in despair for a long time. That's because it's always there. It never dies. And that's because the possibility of a more beautiful world is also always there. It's always available for our choice because of how powerful we are. So the important thing is to validate and not dismiss those moments of hope, because they're like outcroppings of a more beautiful world in ourselves.
Learning to listen then would be to be part of it, is to be open to receiving those gifts.
Yeah.
It's a kind of receptivity to that beauty.
Yeah. Yeah. Witnessing beauty gives hope too. That's why the role of artists and musicians is so important.
Oh, say that again? No.
Yeah. Because
what is the role of beauty in this time? Because some people would say that's a sideshow.
No, it's not a sideshow. The future is built on beauty. I like to say that humanity aspires to beauty rather than height, quality rather than quantity in a more beautiful world. And any act of senseless beauty is a prayer for that future. It's a declaration of this is what's important, even if I can't justify it, even if I'm getting no selfish benefit from it, even if I cannot explain to you how this is going to help the oppressed or help the extinguished, help the ecosystems that are being exploited, help anything. I can't explain how I'm going to do it, but I'm listening to something else within me that knows that this is important. I want to validate that, because we do not know how the world actually works. The old story's view of causality is woefully insufficient to explain the things that I've experienced in my life and that many others have experienced in their life. We have to, if we want to be as powerful as we truly are, we have to open up to a much larger kind of causality that draws from the orchestrating intelligence of the whole world, and that communicates to us what's important and what is ours to do through making us care about something, by making us come alive for something. So if someone says, well, Trevor, justify yourself. Here you are, the world is in crisis and you're just making music. let's put that off until we've solved our problems, and then we can enjoy, you know? And maybe there are external voices or internal voices that come with that criticism sometimes. And maybe you cannot answer them. I don't want you to have to answer them. I want you to listen to what you love doing, regardless of whether it's useful or not. Because the mind doesn't know what's useful. Mm. You don't know what some creation of music or art or love or like you said at the beginning, like petting your cat or holding the hand of somebody as they're going through the death process. You don't know how that ripples out into the future. Sometimes you might be able to concoct a chain of events in which your humble, invisible act of love influences the future. And sometimes you might not be able to. Like if you spend time holding the hand of somebody who's passing, how is that going to affect the future, Trevor? They're going to be dead anyway. And that moment of forgiveness that they had in those last minutes, how is that going to affect the world? But something in us knows that it does. That's why we're attracted to it. That's why the best part of ourselves draws us to do those things. And in these times of uncertainty and despair, what else are we going to listen to when every practical plan to save the world is actually hopeless? If it's up to us and our technologies of control to save the world, it is hopeless. Therefore, we have to listen to something else if we are going to actually walk the path from here to a more beautiful world. We cannot even see the whole path. At most, we can see one or two steps in front of us. We recognize those steps. Here's what is mine to do right now. And sometimes you don't even know if you're going to land. I like to say the path will rise to meet us. You take that step and you find, oh, that there is a path after all. And that this irrational choice motivated by love and beauty and service to life actually did make a difference. And how could I have ever predicted that that would be important? That maybe that like for me sometimes like I like, oh, fine, okay, you know, I'll talk to you. I get distracted by somebody and then it turns out that was the best thing I could have done, even though it seemed inconsequential at the time to my mind. So, you know, the mind today, for many reasons, is unreliable. Partly because of this bewildering, contradictory information environment that where different authorities don't even agree on what's real, like things separating into these different reality bubbles. Partly because of that, partly because our minds are so steeped in a Newtonian force-based causality and ideology of control. And partly just because we're human. Like the mind, it's always been unreliable by itself. And it's especially unreliable today when the elements of our reason have been corrupted. So especially today, more than any other time, we have to listen to the heart. And the mind, yeah, it needs a new logic. You know, we need a new story that aligns with the heart. Because right now, a lot of times the mental story directly contradicts what the heart is asking us to do. So I work with the story and try to bring heart and mind into alignment. And failing that, if you have to choose, listen to the heart.
The story of the heart. It's like, you know, those spam bots that's one way to stop, like to attack a server or something. You send so much information at it, it can't work. And it's almost like the internet, we're being overloaded to where like the brain now it can't function anymore, the mind. You know, it's sort of like this intentional attack, just like what now you're being forced into the heart. And the harder you try to like grasp it with your mind, it just doesn't work.
Yeah.
It's too much information. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially when like like official information is contradicting itself
Oh,
at a
it's just
faster and faster
there's
rate.
no longer anything. It's like,
Yeah.
where's the anchor? I have nothing to hold on to anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like the stage is set for the revolution of the heart. I mean, amidst the madness, it's like the gift is almost like it's like the fog creates it easier to see the contrast of the one thing you're supposed to go to next in a weird way. Uh, it's the gift in the madness.
Hmm.
And I'm hoping we can't be too lost in that grasping, in the informational sickness that we find ourselves in, because it's real easy to endlessly argue our points of view or the COVID this or the that or whatever. I mean, it goes on forever. But underneath it all is I love this idea of like learning how to listen is not necessarily easy these days. It's simple, but it's not easy. But it seems to be the calling.
Yeah. I guess the prerequisite for listening is to know that there is something to listen to. You have to be willing to listen. You have to know that there's a sound out there to listen to.
Mm.
You have to know that there's another human soul in front of you in order to see them. And when you listen, then you can hear. And then you have a new source of information.
Yeah, you have to make the space to allow that gift to even be received by yourself. And that's the direct experience. Like you said, not denying
Yeah.
what's being given to you.
It's like listening to nature. If you want to listen to nature, you have to first agree that nature is speaking. If you want to listen to your heart, you have to accept that your heart is speaking to you before you'll even start.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because I didn't think. Well, maybe I thought, but I wasn't like. I certainly didn't want us to be this about coronavirus. But we talked a lot about it. But it feels like we're getting underneath it and above it and holding it in a sense. Like here I am talking about receiving the gift. I need to receive the gift of what we're talking about. This direct experience. Receive the gift of holding all of the discomfort that comes
Mm-hmm.
with coronavirus. And like my dear brother
Yeah.
Charles is mired in people saying these things. I was like, what's happening? What's happening to my friend Charles? And I have to get in there and look at it and understand, like, I have to hold all of it, you know? And I don't actually, from my cursory reading of what you send out here and there or this and that, I don't pretend to understand your whole experience of what you've been going through or what you even quote unquote believe at this point. I guess I could guess, but I don't really know. But I feel like know you from just the years of weaving lives together and yourself as an author and a human being. And that's not some position you take. That's sort of your intention as a being. And I accept that gift. And there's something there that reflects myself that I want to see. I want you to, you're like helping be a cheerleader for me to say, we can do this. What that thing is, I don't know. It's continuing on and looking for beauty and hoping for more, that more beautiful world. You're helping me believe that it's what I believe too in a part of me. But it's like Ram Dass said, it's like a candle flame. It might be small. It might just be embers. But, as we blow on it and make it into more of a fire. And then he says, all we're going to do is sit around the fire together for eternity. And it just
Mm-hmm.
makes me want to cry because that rings true to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Thank you for that reflection.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you,
Yeah.
for all the years and just for being intrepid in your journey. It means something as opposed to not.
Yeah. So, Yeah. It's up to you if you want to use this as a whole podcast or you maybe take some, excerpts or just do whatever you want with it. I'm
Yeah,
good with whatever you decide.
we can call this the wrap, and I'll play around with it.
Yeah.
Um, it was on my mind. It's funny. Speaking of synchronicities, like that's been in my mind for years. I was like, oh yeah, I'd really like to take another stab with Charles and music and words at some point. And I had literally the night before decided, it's like, I'm gonna, I think it's the time is right. I'm gonna reach out to Charles. And you wrote me the next morning.
Uh-huh.
I mean, it was perfect. And that's a perfect example of like, I could say, oh, well, that's funny. Like, all right, well, great. But it's my choice whether to accept that gift more fully or to accept it in a smaller way. And that's okay. Either choice is okay, but it is up to me.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
And that's that is like my volition. That's my ability to say, I want this to be a bigger gift, and I will accept it's my decision what the meaning of this is. And that's like the role of the individual.
Yeah.
So it's happening. It's unfolding. Well, hang in there, my friend. And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me know if there's anything I can do for you. Especially if you feel like you're going crazy.
Thank you. Thanks. It means a lot.
I'm here for that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's been fun seeing this whole thing progress, and I'm glad you're still kicking and doing your thing. Maybe kicking a little harder, but that's kind of fun to see too.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, stay warm, and I'll keep you updated. All right. Really, thank you so much for the time today.
Yeah.
It's a pleasure to see you.
All right. See you.
Bye, brother. Thanks, Charles, so much for coming on the show. It's always a total honor and a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you again for being so vulnerable. I'm going to get working on that track. I am working on it, but this is great to get the energetic ball rolling by getting the conversation itself out there. So I'm excited for that. Thank you so much, Charles, with all my heart. This track that you're listening to in the background is called Dissolving, and it has a sister track called Dissolved that comes out tomorrow, Wednesday, March 23rd, 2022. This is a collaborative track I did with Superposition, and one's ambient and one has the beats and the vocals of mine. This is the one with the beats and the vocals. So if you want to hear it in its full glory, please do that wherever you listen to music, Spotify, Apple, Tidal, Amazon, etc., etc. And thank you again to everyone on the council for supporting. They had an advanced listen to this song before it came out. That's at patreon.com/eastforest. And I look forward to seeing y'all on the road. Hang in there. Do your best with the information sickness and parsing things out and breathing it out and keeping your head and your heart on straight, because you can handle it. You can do it. You're a brave soul, and you're needed. So you keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit, but if you do it with grace.